My daughter looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, you're going to host 40 people for New Year's Eve. You'll cook, clean, and serve all my guests." I was calmly drinking my tea in my own kitchen when I heard those words. I slowly moved my cup, placed it on the table, and responded with a smile. "Of course, honey, but there's one small detail I haven't told you. I won't be here that day. I'll be on a plane." Her jaw literally dropped. "If you're reading this, please tell me what state you're from, because what happened after that conversation changed my life forever." And when the ball dropped on New Year's Eve, my daughter Brenda realized that the real surprise was just beginning. My name is Rose. I'm 70 years old, and for decades I was the perfect mother, the one who always says yes, the one who's always available, the one who sacrifices everything for family. When my husband Frank died 3 years ago, I thought my daughter Brenda would need me more than ever. Wrong. What she really did was turn me into her unpaid personal housekeeper. Brenda had always been a demanding girl, but when she married Luis 5 years ago, things got worse. He's one of those men who believes that because he has money, he can steamroll everyone. Together, they formed the perfect duo to make me feel invisible in my own life. Every week was the same thing. "Mom, we need you to watch the kids. Mom, prepare dinner for our friends. Mom, clean the house because important visitors are coming." And I, like the fool I was for years, always said yes, always with a smile, always available. Frank used to tell me I was too good to Brenda, that I was spoiling her even as an adult. "Rose," he'd say, "that girl is going to think she can walk all over you someday." How right my husband was. I wish I had listened to him sooner. The last straw came that afternoon of December 28th. Brenda arrived at my house as usual, unannounced, as if it were hers. She was wearing a very expensive red dress that probably cost over $500, with those shoes that make noise when you walk, as if she wanted to announce her arrival to the whole world. She sat on my couch like she was a queen and I was her servant. "Mom," she told me with that sweet but fake voice, "I have wonderful news. Luis and I have decided to throw a spectacular New Year's Eve party. 40 people are coming. Luis's business partners, my friends from the country club, some family members. It's going to be amazing." I kept listening while washing the lunch dishes, not imagining what was coming next. "That's great, dear," I said without turning around. "I hope you have a wonderful time at your new house." That's when I heard her laugh. A laugh that made my blood run cold. "My new house?" "No, Mom. The party's going to be here at your house. Your kitchen is bigger. Your living room is perfect for entertaining people." She paused for a moment, as if savoring what she was about to say. "Besides, you'll do everything. Cooking, cleaning, you'll serve the drinks, you'll wait on all the guests. It's only 40 people, Mom. It's nothing special." I froze, completely still in front of the sink. Had I heard correctly? My own daughter was asking me to be the servant in my own house for her New Year's Eve party. I turned around slowly and saw her there, lounging on my couch with that smug smile that bothered me so much, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to ask your 70-year-old mother to work as domestic help to impress her rich friends. "Brenda," I said, trying to stay calm, "you're asking me to cook and serve 40 people in my own house." "I'm not asking. Mom, I'm telling you. I already sent out the invitations. Everything's already planned. People will come here on the 31st at 7 p.m. I need you to prepare shrimp, salmon, that cheese appetizer you make so well, desserts, drinks. Everything has to be perfect because many important people from Luis's work are coming." I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. I couldn't believe that someone from my own blood was talking to me that way, as if I were her employee, as if my house were her property, as if my 70 years meant nothing. "And what if I don't want to have that party here?" I asked, trying to control my voice. Brenda laughed again. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic." "What else are you going to do? Stay alone watching TV on New Year's Eve? At least you'll feel useful. Besides, it's a perfect opportunity for you to meet important people. Luis says some of his partners have mothers your age. Maybe you'll even make new friends." That's when something inside me snapped. It wasn't gradual. It was instant, like when a rope breaks after carrying too much weight for too long. I walked to the table where my teacup was, picked it up slowly, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Brenda," I said with the calmest voice I could manage, I think it's a wonderful idea. 40 people, gourmet food, full service. Everything will be perfect for your New Year's Eve party. I saw her face light up with happiness. She thought she had won once again. I knew you'd understand, Mom. You're the best. Luis will be so happy when I tell him everything's settled. I took a sip of my tea, savored it slowly, and then told her the news that would change everything. There's just one small detail, sweetheart. I won't be here that day. Brenda's face completely changed. Her smile vanished as if someone had turned off a light. She sat up on the couch and looked at me as if she hadn't understood correctly. What do you mean you won't be here, Mom? We're talking about New Year's Eve. It's in 3 days. Where the hell are you going? I continued drinking my tea with all the tranquility in the world. For the first time in years, I felt in control of the situation. Well, look, dear. 2 weeks ago, I bought a plane ticket for a Caribbean cruise. I leave on December 30th and return on January 5th. It's going to be wonderful. What? Brenda jumped up from the couch like a spring. Her red dress moved dramatically and her heels made a horrible noise against my hardwood floor. You can't leave now. Everything's already planned. People have already confirmed they're coming. What a shame, I said, feigning sadness. But I already paid for the trip. It's non-refundable. Then cancel the damn cruise, Mom. I'm serious. I need you to be here. That's when I decided to tell her the whole truth. I got up from my chair, looked her directly in the eyes, and spoke to her in a tone of voice I hadn't used in years. Firm, determined, and unwavering, without tremors or doubts. Brenda, do you know how many times in the last 3 years you've asked me to watch your children without asking if I have any plans? Do you know how many of your parties I've organized in my house without even receiving a thank you? Do you have any idea how many nights I've spent cooking for your guests while you paraded around like the perfect hostess? Mom, that's different. You're my mother. You're supposed to— I interrupted her. I'm your mother, not your employee. This is my house, not your event hall. And I'm 70 years old. I'm not a young woman who can spend 14 hours cooking and serving so you look good to your friends. Brenda looked at me as if I were speaking to her in another language, as if the idea that I could say no to her was something completely impossible to understand. But Mom, where am I going to have the party now? My apartment is too small. There's no room for 40 people. That's your problem, not mine. I'm not your events coordinator. But I'm your only daughter. That's precisely why it hurts me more, I told her, feeling my voice fail for the first time in the conversation. Brenda, I gave you everything. When you were a child, when you were a teenager, when you got married, I was always there for you. But ever since your father died, you treat me like I'm your personal servant. That's not true. No. Last week you asked me to clean your house because Luis's parents were coming. Last month I had to cancel my doctor's appointment because you needed me to watch the kids. 15 days ago you came here with a list of food you wanted me to cook for your birthday, and you didn't even invite me to the dinner. Brenda remained silent. She knew that everything I was telling her was true, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Mom, I thought you liked helping me. You never said anything. Of course I never said anything because I'm your mother and I love you. But loving doesn't mean being a fool. And for 3 years I've been a complete fool. I saw tears starting to form in her eyes, but they weren't tears of repentance. They were tears of frustration and anger. Brenda had never had to face the consequences of her actions. And now that I was confronting her with them, she didn't know how to handle the situation. And what am I going to tell Luis? What am I going to tell all the guests? The truth, that your mother decided to live her life instead of living to please you. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish. That word hurt me more than I thought it could. After 70 years of giving everything for my family, after sacrificing my dreams for others' dreams, after putting everyone's needs before mine, my daughter called me selfish for taking 5 days for myself. Selfish? I asked her, feeling my voice get stronger. I'm the selfish one, Brenda? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was, without needing anything? When was the last time you told me you loved me without asking me for a favor afterward? Brenda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out because we both knew the answer was never. It had been years since our conversations revolved around anything other than what she needed from me. Mom, I didn't know you felt this way. Of course you didn't know, because you were never interested in knowing. Luis appeared at that moment. He had been waiting in the car, but apparently he got tired of waiting and decided to come in looking for his wife. When he opened my door without knocking, as he always did, as if it were his house, I knew the situation was going to get worse. "What's going on here? Why are you shouting?" he asked with that authoritative tone of voice he always used, as if he owned the world. "Luis, my mother says she won't be here for the party. She's going on a cruise." Luis looked at me as if I had said I was going to the moon. "Cruise, Mrs. Rose, are you serious?" "Completely serious. But that's impossible. Everything's organized now. We've already spent money on invitations. We've already bought part of the food, assuming you were going to cook the rest. You can't just leave us hanging like this." "Of course I can. It's my life and my house." Luis approached me with that intimidating attitude he used in business. It probably worked with his employees and partners, but it wasn't going to work with me. "Come on, ma'am. Be reasonable. You don't have anything better to do on New Year's Eve. We have important commitments. This party is crucial for my career. People are coming who could change my professional future. And what does that have to do with me? You're part of this family. You have an obligation to support us." My obligation as a mother ended when Brenda turned 18. Everything I've done since then has been out of love, not obligation. And love can't be one way forever. Brenda and Luis exchanged glances as if they were planning something. I knew that look. They had used it before when they wanted to convince me to do something I didn't want to do. "Mom," Brenda said, changing her tone to a sweeter, more manipulative one. "I know you're upset and you're right about many things, but please, just one more time. I promise that after New Year's things will change. We'll value you more. We'll include you in our plans." No, I said firmly. I said no. I'm not going to cancel my trip. I'm not going to throw your party. I'm not going to continue being your unpaid housekeeper. And above all, I'm not going to continue believing in promises that would never be fulfilled. The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda and Luis looked at me as if they couldn't believe I was saying no to them, as if all these years they had forgotten that I had the right to make my own decisions. Finally, Luis broke the silence. "Fine, ma'am. If that's your final decision, we'll remember it for a long time." There was something in his tone that gave me chills. It wasn't just anger. It was a veiled threat. But at that moment, sitting in my own kitchen, defending my right to live my own life, I didn't care. What I didn't know was that Luis already had a plan, and my refusal to be his servant would cost me much more than I ever imagined. Story continues with the American adaptation, following Rose through her cruise, the discovery of Luis's financial crimes, the legal battles, and ultimately her triumphant emergence as an independent woman who helps other elderly Americans facing similar family abuse. The aftermath and legal discovery after. Brenda and Luis left my house that afternoon. Something strange happened. Instead of feeling guilty as I expected, I felt free. For the first time in years, I had set boundaries. I had said no, and the world hadn't ended. That night, I called the travel agency to confirm all the details of my cruise. 5 days sailing the Caribbean, visiting Jamaica, Cozumel, and the Bahamas. Something I had always dreamed of doing with Frank, but we never had the time or opportunity when he was alive. Now, with his savings and my retirement, I could finally afford it. The next 2 days were strangely quiet. Brenda didn't call me, didn't come to visit, nothing. I thought maybe she was busy looking for another place for her party, or maybe she had decided to cancel it. Frankly, I didn't care. I was too excited packing my suitcase and imagining myself drinking piña coladas under the Caribbean sun. On the morning of December 30th, when I was finishing packing, the doorbell rang. It was a messenger with an official envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter from a law firm I didn't know. The content left me speechless. The letter stated that Brenda had initiated a legal process to have me declared mentally incompetent. According to the document, she claimed I was suffering from senile dementia, and my recent decisions, like spending money irresponsibly on trips and refusing to fulfill my family obligations, were clear proof of my mental deterioration. She requested to be granted legal guardianship over me and my assets. I sat on my couch with trembling legs. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My own daughter was declaring me insane because I refused to be her servant. She was trying to take away my house and my money because I decided to take a vacation. I immediately called the number on the letter. A secretary told me that attorney Michael Henderson could see me that same afternoon if it was urgent. I told her it was more than urgent. It was desperate. Michael was a man of about 50, graying hair, kind eyes, but an intelligent look. When I showed him the letter, his expression became serious. Mrs. Rose, these cases of family financial abuse are more common than people think. Can you tell me exactly what happened between you and your daughter? I told him everything. The New Year's Eve party, the years of being treated like a domestic employee, my decision to take a cruise, Brenda and Luis's reaction. Michael listened attentively, taking notes. Have you had any mental health issues recently? Have you visited any doctor who can confirm you're perfectly lucid? Dr. Ramirez, my family doctor, saw me 2 weeks ago for my annual checkup. Everything was normal. Perfect. And your finances? Do you have complete control over your money? Completely. I manage my own bank account, pay my own bills. I even manage the investments Frank left me. Michael smiled for the first time since I arrived. Ma'am, with all respect, you're more sensible than most 40-year-olds I know. Your daughter has no legal basis for this process, but we need to act quickly. What can I do? First, we'll do a complete psychological evaluation that confirms your mental capacity. Then we'll review all your legal documents. Do you have a will? Any power of attorney signed? I have a will, but I've never signed any power of attorney. Good. And the house where you live is in your name? Yes. Frank left it completely in my name when he died. Michael frowned. Does your daughter know this? She thinks she's going to inherit the house? Well, we've never specifically talked about it, but I guess she assumes the house will be hers someday. Ah, there's the real problem. Mrs. Rose, this isn't about a New Year's Eve party. It's about money. Your daughter thinks you're spending her inheritance on cruises and indulgences, and she's trying to take control before it's too late. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Was it possible that my own daughter cared more about money than my well-being? What can I do? Take your cruise, enjoy it. I'll handle the legal process. When you return, we'll have a very interesting conversation with your daughter. That night, I could barely sleep. I couldn't believe my life had changed so drastically in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I was a happy grandmother who sacrificed for family. Now I was a woman fighting in court to defend my sanity and my freedom. The morning of December 31st arrived quickly. My flight would leave at 2 p.m. While I waited for the taxi that would take me to the airport, I decided to do something that was probably a bad idea, but that I needed to do. I sent Brenda a text message. Daughter, I just learned about the lawsuit. I still can't believe you've gone so far, but I want you to know one thing. I'm leaving on my cruise as planned. When I return, we'll have a very serious conversation about what it really means to be a family. Enjoy your New Year's Eve party. I received no response. The taxi arrived punctually, and as I watched my house disappear through the window, I felt strangely calm. I had made the right decision. I was going to enjoy those 5 days, no matter what it cost. But what I didn't know was that while I was flying to Miami to board the cruise, Brenda was discovering that canceling a party for 40 people on the day of the event would be much harder than I had imagined. According to what they told me later, she started making phone calls to some guests to explain that there was a family problem and the party would have to be canceled. But most were already on their way. Some were coming from other cities, and several had spent money on hotels and new clothes for the occasion. Luis was furious, not only because the party was canceled, but because some of the guests were important partners from his company, people he had been hoping to use this opportunity to strengthen business relationships with. Now he would have to give humiliating explanations about why his mother-in-law had left them high and dry. At 5 p.m. on December 31st, Brenda made a desperate decision. The party was going to happen anyway. She hired an emergency caterer, which cost her triple the normal price because it was last minute, and managed to hire waiters and bartenders by paying them holiday rates. When the first guests started arriving at 7 p.m., my house looked spectacular. The lights were on, there was music playing, and the aroma of catered food was floating in the air. Brenda had managed to save her party, even though it cost her more than $3,000 she hadn't planned to spend. But there was one problem Brenda hadn't considered. She didn't have keys to my house. All these years, I had always been there to open the door and receive the guests, to make everything work perfectly. Brenda had never needed keys because I had never been absent. When the first group of guests rang the doorbell, Brenda realized her mistake. She was outside my house, dressed in an elegant emerald green dress that had cost more than $600, watching her guests' cars arrive, and she had no way to get in. She tried calling my cell phone, but I had already turned off the phone because I was on the plane. She tried to find an open window, but Frank had always been very careful about security, and all windows had security locks. Luis arrived at that moment with more guests, including his boss and some important partners. When he saw Brenda standing outside like a statue, her face red with embarrassment, he lost it. What the hell is going on? Why haven't we gone inside yet? I don't have the keys, Brenda whispered, trying to keep the guests from hearing. What do you mean you don't have keys? I never needed them. Mom was always here. That's when Luis realized the magnitude of the problem they had created. They had not only lost their free housekeeper, but they had also lost access to the house they considered their own personal event hall. Meanwhile, I was toasting on the deck of a beautiful cruise ship, watching the sunset over the Atlantic Ocean, without imagining the chaos that was unfolding at my house. But that chaos was just the beginning of a series of discoveries that would change everything forever. The humiliation and discovery. While I sailed peacefully toward Jamaica, completely unaware of the drama unfolding at home, Brenda was experiencing the greatest humiliation of her life. 40 elegantly dressed people were waiting outside my house, watching as the party host couldn't even open the door. Luis tried to maintain his composure in front of his guests, but the situation was unsustainable. His boss, Mr. Morrison, a 60-year-old man accustomed to everything working perfectly, approached with a look of irritation. Luis, what's happening here? My wife and I came from downtown expecting an elegant evening, not a comedy show. Mr. Morrison, there's a small technical problem, but it will be resolved in minutes, Luis lied while sweating, despite the December cold. Desperate, Brenda decided to take drastic measures. She asked Luis to try forcing the back door of the kitchen, but Frank had installed high-security locks after a series of burglaries in the neighborhood the previous year. There was no way to enter without keys or without breaking something. What if we break a window? Luis suggested in a low voice. Are you crazy? It's my mother's house. Everyone's going to see us doing it. While they deliberated, the guests began to get impatient. Some left without further explanation. Others started making calls to look for alternative plans. Brenda's prestigious New Year's Eve party was becoming a public fiasco. Finally, after 45 minutes of waiting, Brenda had to admit defeat. With tears of humiliation in her eyes, she approached the remaining group of guests and gave them the news. I regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, tonight's party will have to be canceled. There has been an urgent family problem. A family problem? She was interrupted by one of her friends from the club, Diana, with a sarcastic tone. Brenda, everyone knows your mother went on a cruise because she didn't want your party. My housekeeper told me the whole story. She's friends with the lady who cleans your neighbor's house, and the whole neighborhood already knows what happened. The silence that followed was deadly. Brenda realized that her humiliation wasn't just for that night, but had become neighborhood gossip. The story of how sweet Mrs. Rose finally stood up to her abusive daughter was already circulating among housekeepers, homemakers, and probably reaching the social clubs where Brenda tried to maintain her image as a successful woman. Luis, seeing that his professional reputation was in ruins, tried to salvage something from the situation. Mr. Morrison, how about we all go to dinner at that new restaurant downtown? I'll pay, of course, but the damage was done. Morrison looked at him with contempt and said something Luis would never forget. Young man, a man who can't manage his own family can hardly manage important company accounts. We'll have to reconsider your position on the project we were discussing. That night, as the last guest dispersed and Brenda and Luis stood alone outside my house, they finally understood the magnitude of what they had lost. It wasn't just a night out, it was free access to a perfect event house, a cook and hostess at no cost, and above all, a woman who had dedicated her life to making them look good without asking for anything in return. But their humiliation was just beginning. The legal battle intensifies the next day, January 1st. Brenda decided she needed to take more extreme measures. If she couldn't use the house for social events, at least she could start preparing the groundwork to inherit it as quickly as possible. And if I was spending her inheritance on ridiculous cruises, she had to act fast. She called the lawyer she had hired for the mental incapacity process and asked him to speed everything up. She also decided to do something she had been hiding from me for months. She started looking for ways to access my bank account. It turns out that Luis, who worked at a financial services company, had some contacts at the bank where I managed my accounts. In recent weeks, he had been making discreet inquiries about my financial movements, trying to get information about my savings and investments. What he discovered left him furious and greedy at the same time. I had much more money than they had imagined. In addition to Frank's pension and my own savings, I had invested wisely in recent years, and my portfolio was worth almost $200,000. For those living paycheck to paycheck despite their good salaries due to their extravagant lifestyle, that amount represented a fortune. Brenda told Luis that night while they ate Chinese food from boxes because she no longer had anyone to cook for her. Your mother has much more money than we thought. And if she keeps spending it on stupid things like cruises, there won't be anything left for us. What do you suggest? That we speed up the legal process? That we find a way to control her finances before she spends it all on old-fashioned whims? Brenda nodded, but there was something in Luis's eyes that disturbed her. A greed that went beyond anything she had seen before. What I didn't know was that Luis had much more serious financial problems than he had confessed to her. Meanwhile, I was having the happiest days I'd had in years. The cruise was everything I had dreamed of and more. I met a lady named Frances, 72 years old, who was traveling alone after recently becoming a widow. During our long conversations on deck, I told her my whole story. "Rose," Frances told me as we watched the sunset over Cozumel, "your daughter isn't bad. She's lost. But your son-in-law? That man gives me a bad feeling. Be careful when you get back." I didn't understand why she told me that at the time, but her words stayed with me. On the 4th day of the cruise, while we were anchored in the Bahamas, I received a call from attorney Michael via the ship's satellite phone. His voice sounded urgent. "Rose, I need you to return to the States immediately. Things have happened while you were away." "What kind of things?" "Your son-in-law has been making inquiries about your bank accounts in places where he shouldn't be making inquiries. And there's something else. I found some very interesting documents among your late husband's papers that I think you need to see." "What kind of documents?" "I can't talk on the phone, but it has to do with Luis and money that disappeared from the company where your husband worked before he died." I felt like the world was spinning under my feet. "Are you saying Luis stole money from Frank's company?" "I'm saying there's evidence that someone did and your husband knew about it. Apparently he was investigating before he died, but never had time to do anything about it." That night I couldn't sleep. I was in the most beautiful cabin I'd ever had in my life, sailing through crystal clear waters under a star-filled sky. But my mind was back in the States, trying to understand what Frank had discovered and why he had never told me anything. On the next day, my last day of the cruise, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting until the original return date, I changed my flight to return that same night. I told Frances I had to deal with an urgent family situation. "Be careful, Rose," she told me as we said goodbye. "Men like your son-in-law are capable of anything when they feel cornered." Those words stayed with me during the entire flight back. When the plane landed in Miami at 11 p.m. on January 4th, I was no longer the same woman who had left 5 days before. I had discovered my own strength during those days of freedom, but I had also discovered that my family had darker secrets than I had ever imagined. Michael was waiting for me at the airport with a briefcase full of documents that would change my life forever. But before opening it, he told me something that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Rose, before I show you this, you need to know that Brenda and Luis were at your house yesterday. The neighbors saw them enter with a locksmith." "A locksmith?" I asked, feeling my heart beat faster. "They entered my house without my permission?" Michael nodded gravely as he helped me with my luggage. "The neighbors said they arrived yesterday morning with a man who changed the locks. When the lady next door asked what was happening, Brenda told her you had given her permission because you had lost your keys." "That's a lie. I never gave permission for anything. I know. That's why we need to go to your house right now. But first, Let me show you what I found. During the ride in Michael's car to my house, I opened the briefcase he had brought. What I saw inside took my breath away. There were copies of bank documents, suspicious transfers, and a handwritten letter from Frank addressed to me. The letter said, "My dear Rose, if you're reading this, it's because something happened to me before I could solve a very serious problem. In recent months, I discovered that Luis has been stealing money from our company, not in large amounts at once, but in small amounts over more than 2 years. I already have all the evidence. I also discovered that he's been pressuring Brenda to ask you to lend him money he never intended to return. I was preparing everything to confront him when I had the heart attack. My love, be careful with that man. He's not who he appears to be, and I fear what he might do if he feels cornered. The documents that prove everything are in the bank safe. Attorney Michael Henderson has all the information. Protect yourself, my love. I love you forever. Frank." Tears started rolling down my face. Frank had died carrying this secret to protect me. But now that I was defending myself, Luis was feeling threatened. "How much money did he steal?" I asked with a trembling voice. "According to your husband's documents, approximately $60,000 over 2.5 years. And why didn't Frank report him? Because Luis is very smart. He stole from accounts he legally managed as an employee, but in a way that looked like administrative errors or legitimate expenses. Your husband needed time to gather irrefutable evidence. When I arrived home, what I saw broke my heart. My house, the place where I had lived for 30 years with Frank, where I raised Brenda, where I kept all my memories, looked different. The lights were on, even though no one should have been there. Michael and I carefully approached the front door. Sure enough, there was a new lock. I rang the doorbell of my own house, feeling like a stranger. Brenda opened the door as if she had been expecting me. She was wearing a robe I recognized immediately. It was mine, a cream silk robe Frank had given me on our 20th anniversary. "Hello, Mom. Good thing you came back early. We need to talk. Why did you change the locks on my house?" "Because after your erratic behavior last week, Luis and I decided it was better to take some precautions. We didn't know if you'd come back acting irrationally again." Michael stepped forward and introduced himself. "Miss Brenda, I'm your mother's attorney. What you've done constitutes breaking and entering. This house is legally registered in Mrs. Rose's name, and you had no right to change the locks." Brenda looked at me with a cold smile I had never seen before. "Mom, you brought a lawyer against your own family?" "I hired a lawyer because apparently my own family is trying to steal my house." "Nobody's stealing anything. We're protecting your assets from being ruined by impulsive decisions. Do you know how much you spent on that ridiculous cruise? More than $4,000. Money that should be saved for your future or for emergencies. The money is mine, and I can spend it on whatever I want." Luis appeared at that moment, coming out of what had been my living room. He was wearing Frank's favorite sweater, a gray wool sweater I had kept as a keepsake after he died. Seeing Luis wearing my deceased husband's clothes was like being slapped in the face. "What the hell are you doing wearing Frank's clothes? Brenda told me you were going to donate all these old clothes anyway. I thought it would be a shame to waste good things." Michael gently touched my arm. "Mrs. Rose, we need to enter the house to check what else they've taken." "They're not going anywhere," Luis said in a threatening tone. "This house is now under our legal protection until the mental incapacity process is resolved." "What mental incapacity process?" Michael asked, although I already knew the answer. Brenda took some papers out of her purse. "We've initiated a legal process to declare our mother incompetent. Her behavior last week, spending thousands of dollars impulsively and refusing to fulfill her family responsibilities, are clear signs of mental deterioration." Michael quickly reviewed the papers. "These documents don't have legal validity yet. They haven't been approved by any judge. And you have no right to take control of a property based on a petition. We have the right to protect an elderly woman who's clearly making dangerous decisions," Luis insisted. At that moment, something inside me snapped completely. It wasn't just anger. It was pure fury that I had never felt in my life. I looked at my daughter dressed in my clothes, standing in the doorway of my house with locks I couldn't open, and my son-in-law wearing my deceased husband's clothes while threatening me on my own property. "Brenda, I said with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. For 70 years, I've been an obedient woman. I obeyed my parents, I obeyed your father, and for the last 3 years, I've obeyed you. But it's over. Mom, you're acting... Shut up! I yelled at her for the first time in my life. Shut up and listen to me. Michael, tell them what we found in Frank's documents. Michael opened his briefcase. Luis Martinez, I have documented evidence that you stole approximately $60,000 from the company where Mr. Frank worked over a period of 2.5 years before his death. Luis's face instantly changed. The color drained from his face, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Pure fear. That's impossible. Frank never said anything about because he died before he could confront you. But he left all the evidence documented. Brenda looked at Luis, confused. What are you talking about, Luis? What money? Luis began backing away into the house. This is ridiculous. These are unfounded accusations from a man who's already dead. Unfounded? Michael presented more documents. I have copies of bank transfers, modifications of accounting records, and even recordings of phone conversations Frank made when he began to suspect. Recordings? Luis's voice failed. Your father-in-law was smarter than you thought. When he started noticing discrepancies, he installed a recording system in his office. We have records of you admitting to the theft in a phone conversation with an accomplice. Brenda turned to Luis with tears in her eyes. Luis, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal money from my father's company. Luis didn't respond. Instead, he ran into the house and locked the door. Michael immediately grabbed his phone. I'm calling the police. We have enough evidence for an arrest warrant. While Michael spoke with the authorities, Brenda sat on my front steps, crying inconsolably. Mom, I didn't know anything about this. I swear I didn't know Luis had stolen money. But you knew he was using me, didn't you? You knew that for 3 years I had been your unpaid housekeeper? Brenda nodded through her tears. But I thought you liked helping us. I thought it made you feel useful. What it made me feel was invisible. At that moment, we heard noises inside the house. Luis was moving things, probably trying to hide evidence or find a way to escape. The police arrived 15 minutes later. When they knocked on the door and identified themselves, Luis finally came out with his hands up. He was carrying a suitcase in one hand and an envelope in the other. What happened next changed my life forever and made me realize that my decision to take a cruise wasn't just a declaration of independence. It was the first step in discovering the truth about my family and reclaiming not only my house, but my dignity. The full truth revealed when the police handcuffed Luis, the envelope he was holding fell to the ground. Michael immediately picked it up, and when he opened it, he found something none of us expected. Copies of my bank documents and papers with signatures that looked like mine, but that I had never signed. Mrs. Rose, Michael said, showing me the papers. Do you recognize this signature? I looked at the documents and felt like I had been doused in ice water. Someone had been practicing my signature and had managed to imitate it almost perfectly. It's not my signature, but it's very similar. The arresting officer, Officer Hernandez, approached us. What kind of documents are these? Michael quickly reviewed them. They appear to be authorizations for bank transfers. If these signatures were real, they would give Luis complete access to Mrs. Rose's accounts. Luis, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. She gave me those documents voluntarily. Rose wanted me to help her manage her finances because she was getting confused with numbers. That's a lie, I shouted. I never gave you permission to touch my money. Officer Hernandez looked at me. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a complete statement. And you too, he said to Brenda. Brenda was still crying on the steps. I didn't know anything about this, Mom. You have to believe me. Luis told me you had asked him for help with your bank accounts, and I believed him without question. He showed me some papers with your signature. He told me you were starting to have memory problems and were ashamed to admit it. Michael approached Brenda. Miss, did he ever ask you for information about your mother's finances? Account numbers, access codes, anything like that? Brenda nodded slowly. A few months ago, he asked me where Mom kept her important papers. He told me he wanted to help her organize them better. And you told him? I told him that Mom always kept everything in Dad's desk, in the study. I felt like I had been slapped again. You told him where I kept my private documents? Mom, he told me it was to help you. He said you had asked him, but that you were too embarrassed to ask me directly. At that moment, I understood the magnitude of the manipulation. Luis wasn't just stealing from me. He was also manipulating Brenda so that she was his unwitting accomplice. He had convinced her that I was losing mental abilities, that I needed to be cared for and monitored, and that he was the hero who was going to save the family. Officer Hernandez spoke into his radio and then turned to us. We're going to need to search the house for more evidence. You two can accompany us to the station to give statements. Before we left, I asked Michael to accompany me to Frank's study. I wanted to see what Luis had been doing in the most sacred place in my house. What I found broke my heart. Frank's desk was completely messy. The drawers were open, papers were scattered everywhere, and most painfully, there were photos of us torn on the floor. Photos of our wedding, of when Brenda was little, of our anniversaries. Luis had destroyed them while searching for documents. But what shocked me most was finding a notebook with handwritten notes. I immediately recognized Frank's handwriting. They were notes about his investigations of Luis's theft, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Michael, I said with a choked voice. Frank knew he was dying. What do you mean? I showed him the last entry in the notebook. It said, "If something happens to me before I resolve this, Rose needs to know the truth. Luis is dangerous. He's not just stealing money, he's planning something bigger. I've seen the way he looks at my wife when he thinks I'm not looking. It's not admiration, it's calculation. He's waiting for me to die so he can manipulate Brenda and gain access to all our assets." My hands trembled as I read those words. Frank had died knowing he was leaving me in danger, but unable to protect me. Justice at the police station during the next 3 hours, the whole truth came out. Luis had not only stolen money from Frank's company, but had also been forging my signature for months to access my bank accounts. He had stolen more than $15,000 from my personal savings, always in small amounts so I wouldn't notice. But the worst was yet to come. When investigators checked his computer, they discovered he had been researching the value of my house, getting quotes from real estate agents, and had even contacted a probate attorney to ask about inheritance processes when someone is declared mentally incompetent. Mrs. Rose, Detective Gonzalez told me, who was handling the case. Your son-in-law had a very detailed plan. First, he was going to have you declared mentally incompetent. Then he was going to take control of your finances as legal guardian. And eventually he was going to sell your house, claiming he needed specialized care that required the money from the sale. And then what would happen to me? According to the documents we found, he had budgets from several nursing homes, the cheapest ones he could find. Brenda, who had been listening to everything from the chair next to me, started crying even harder. Mom, I swear I didn't know any of this. Luis told me he loved you like his own mother, that he only wanted the best for you. And you never questioned why the best thing for me always meant I worked for you for free. I thought you liked feeling needed after Dad died. What I liked was feeling loved. There's a very big difference. Detective Gonzalez explained to us that Luis would be charged with fraud, document forgery, theft, and conspiracy to commit financial abuse of an elderly person. The evidence was so overwhelming that he would probably face several years in prison. And what will happen to the mental incapacity claim? Michael asked. That claim will be dismissed immediately. It was clearly filed as part of a fraudulent scheme. When we finally left the police station, it was 2 a.m. Brenda and I stood in the parking lot, not knowing what to say to each other. Mom, Brenda finally said, can you ever forgive me? I looked into her eyes. This woman who had been my baby, my little girl, my pride and joy for so many years, but also the woman who had been willing to declare me insane to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. Brenda, I forgive you for being manipulated, but I don't forgive you for not noticing I was being hurt. For 3 years, you saw me working as a housekeeper in my own house. You saw me being treated with disrespect, and you never said anything. That wasn't Luis's manipulation. That was your choice. But you thought what was convenient to think. Because it was easier to have a mother who did everything for free than to have to hire employees and pay for services. Brenda remained silent because she knew I was right. Where are you going to live now? I asked. I don't know. Luis handled all our finances. I don't even know how much money we have in the bank, or if we have money in the bank. For a moment, I felt the old maternal compassion, the instinct to protect my daughter, to offer her my house to fix her problem. But then I remembered Frank's words in the notebook. I remembered the New Year's Eve humiliation. I remembered the 3 years of being invisible in my own life. That's your problem to solve, not mine. The unexpected opportunity. Michael drove me back to my house. The locks had been changed again by a police locksmith, and they gave me the new keys. When I entered my house after 5 days of cruising, and 1 day of nightmare, I realized that although physically it was the same house, everything had changed forever. But there was something else that was going to change, something I didn't even expect, because the next morning I would receive a call that would give me the opportunity for perfect revenge, a poetic justice I never imagined in my wildest dreams. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in a week, but I felt like I was in a completely different place. My house had been violated, my memories desecrated, and my trust in my family destroyed. But strangely, I also felt stronger than ever. I was having my breakfast when the phone rang. It was Diana, Brenda's friend from the club who had been at the failed New Year's Eve party. Mrs. Rose, I hope I'm not bothering you. I know these have been very difficult days for your family. What can I do for you, Diana? Well, the truth is I'm calling because I saw the news last night about Luis's arrest, and I wanted to offer you something that might interest you. What kind of offer? It turns out my husband is president of the business club that Luis always wanted to be a member of. For years, Luis has been trying to impress us, so we'd recommend him for membership. In fact, the New Year's Eve party was part of his strategy to show us he belonged in our social circle. This was new information for me. I knew Luis was using my house and my work to try to climb the social ladder. And what does this have to do with me? Well, my husband is organizing a very important charity dinner next Saturday. All the club members will be present, including several important people from the business community. We usually hire a very exclusive catering service, but the chef had a family emergency and we canceled at the last minute. I started to understand where the conversation was going. Several people who know your reputation as a cook have suggested I ask if you'd be interested in catering the event. Of course, we'd pay you very well. We're talking about $3,000 for one night's work. $3,000. More than Luis had stolen from me in months of small transfers. How many people would it be? 50. We'd need elegant appetizers, main course, desserts, and of course, impeccable presentation. The event is at the club's main hall. Diana, can I ask why you're specifically offering this to me? There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Rose, I'm going to be honest with you. For years, we've seen how Luis and Brenda treated you. Everyone in our social circle noticed. The way you worked like a housekeeper in your own house while they took the credit. It seemed terrible to us, but it wasn't our place to interfere in family matters. Now, after what happened on New Year's Eve, and now with everything that's come to light about Luis, well, let's say many of us want to show our respect, and also want Luis to know that when he gets out on bail, the community is on your side, not theirs. The offer was tempting, but there was one thing I needed to know. Diana, will Luis be at that dinner? Oh yes, definitely. He had bought a table for 8 people months ago, trying to impress potential clients. Of course, now that he's in jail, he technically can't attend, but his bail will be approved tomorrow. His family has money and the charges aren't considered high flight risk. Perfect. A chance to confront Luis in public at the exact event he had planned to use to elevate his social status, while I collected $3,000 for doing what he always expected me to do for free. I accepted Diana's offer. The perfect revenge. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I hired 2 kitchen assistants recommended by Michael, bought the best ingredients I could find, and planned a menu that would make everyone remember that night for the rest of their lives. But my real preparation wasn't culinary. It was emotional and strategic. On Friday night, Brenda showed up at my door. She looked terrible. Deep dark circles, wrinkled clothes, unkempt hair. It was obvious she hadn't been sleeping well since Luis's arrest. Mom, I need to talk to you. About what? Luis got out on bail this morning and he's furious with you. He says you knew about the money from Dad's company for a long time. And now you're using that information for revenge because you didn't want to throw a New Year's Eve party. I looked at her, incredulous. Brenda, do you believe that story? I don't know what to believe anymore. My whole world turned upside down in 1 week. Your world turned upside down because your husband is a thief and a manipulator, not because I decided to fight for my rights, Mom. Luis says that if you drop the charges, he can return the money he borrowed. Now he says it was borrowed. He says Dad gave him verbal permission to use that money for investments and that he was going to pay it back with interest. Brenda, your father died 3 years ago. If Luis had permission to take that money, why did he keep taking it after Frank's death? And why was he forging my signature to access my personal accounts? Brenda had no answer for that. Mom, Brenda said, changing her tone to a sweeter, more manipulative one. Luis says that if you don't drop the charges, he's going to make this whole situation very public and very ugly. He says he's going to tell things about you and Dad that will hurt the family's reputation. What kind of things? He wouldn't tell me specifically, but he said Dad had secrets you didn't know about. I felt a chill, but not of fear, of anger. Luis was trying to blackmail me using Frank's memory. Brenda, your husband is going to prison. The charges against him are solid. There's documented evidence, and there's nothing he can say that will change that. If he wants to act tough and threaten a 70-year-old woman, go ahead, but tell him that tomorrow night he'll have the chance to see me in person. What do you mean? I'm going to be working at the business club charity dinner. The same dinner he was going to attend to impress his important contacts. Brenda's face went pale. Mom, you're going to work as staff at the event Luis was supposed to be a guest at. I'm not going to work as staff. I'm going to work as head chef, earning $3,000 while he sits in the audience knowing he's broke. But Mom, that's going to be humiliating for him. Exactly. That night, after Brenda left, I stayed awake planning not only the next day's menu, but also what I was going to say to Luis when I saw him. She had spent 3 years being invisible, being ignored, being treated like a servant in my own life. Tomorrow I would be seen, respected, and paid for my work, while Luis faced the consequences of his actions. But what I didn't know was that Luis was also planning something for that night, something that would turn an elegant charity dinner into a confrontation that no one at that club would ever forget. The charity dinner showdown on Saturday morning, as I prepared for what I knew would be one of the most important days of my life, I received a call from Michael. Mrs. Rose, I have news about Luis. Last night he was making calls from his mother-in-law's house where he's staying temporarily. It seems he's trying to raise emergency money, and according to my sources, he's also trying to buy airline tickets. Airline tickets? Where to? To countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. My blood ran cold. He's trying to escape. It's possible, but there's something else. He was also asking about you, specifically about where you'll be tonight. How could he know about the dinner? Brenda told him. And Mrs. Rose, I think he's going to show up at that dinner, not as a guest, but to confront you publicly, to try to humiliate you before he disappears. Let him come, I said with a determination that surprised me. I'm ready for him. But in reality, no one was prepared for what Luis was about to do that night. On Saturday evening, I arrived at the business club at 4 p.m. to begin preparations. The main dining room was spectacular, high ceilings with crystal chandeliers, huge windows overlooking the garden, and tables elegantly decorated with white tablecloths and gold centerpieces. My 2 assistants, Maya and Carmen, were already organizing ingredients in the club's professional kitchen. For the past 3 days, we had planned every detail of the menu: garlic shrimp as appetizers, glazed salmon with mango salsa as the main course, and my secret specialty, a tres leche dessert with tropical fruits that I had perfected over 30 years of cooking for my family. As I worked, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. For years, I had prepared elaborate dishes for Brenda and Luis's parties without receiving a penny or any recognition. Tonight, I was going to cook for 50 people, and they would pay me $3,000, plus receive the respect and admiration I had always deserved. At 6 p.m., the first guests began arriving. Through the window connecting the kitchen to the main dining room, I could see all the important people in the business community. I recognized several clients from the company where Frank worked, some city council members, and various couples I had seen at Brenda's parties over the years. Diana came into the kitchen to greet me. Mrs. Rose, everything looks and smells wonderful. The guests are already asking who the chef is. Has Luis arrived yet? Not yet, but according to Brenda, he confirmed he would come. He bought the table months ago and apparently doesn't want to lose the money. At 7:30, as I was serving the appetizers, I finally saw him enter. Luis was wearing an elegant black suit that probably cost more than $1,000, money I now knew had been stolen. He walked with that characteristic arrogance, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been arrested 3 days earlier for theft and document forgery. What shocked me most was seeing that Brenda wasn't with him. He had come alone, which seemed strange until I saw how some guests reacted when they recognized him. Conversation stopped momentarily. People turned and whispered, and it was obvious that everyone knew what had happened. Luis headed to his table, which was near the center of the room. He had invited 7 people, including his boss and some potential partners, but only 3 came, and from their faces, it was obvious they were uncomfortable. When I started serving the main course, Luis finally saw me through the kitchen window. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in his gaze that gave me chills. It wasn't just anger, it was pure hatred. During dinner, everything was going perfectly. The guests were delighted with the food. Diana made several announcements recognizing my work, and I felt prouder and more respected than I had in years. But then, as I was preparing the desserts, Luis got up from his table. Instead of going to the bathroom or the bar as I expected, he headed straight for the kitchen entrance. Maya and Carmen looked at me worriedly when they saw him approaching. "Mrs. Rose," Maya whispered, "do you want us to call security?" "No, let me talk to him." Luis entered the kitchen with that fake smile I knew so well. "Hello, Rose. What a surprise to find you working here." "It's no surprise, Luis. It's my job. A job for which I'm being very well paid." "Ah, $3,000, how impressive. Do you know how much money you lost in the stock market in the last 2 weeks while you were playing victim?" "What are you talking about?" "Your investments, dear mother-in-law. While you were on that ridiculous cruise crying to lawyers, the market crashed. You lost almost $20,000 in 2 days." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not possible. I didn't authorize any sales." "You didn't need to authorize anything. Remember, I have access to your accounts." Luis took out his phone and showed me a screen. "I sold all your stocks the day I got out on bail, officially to protect your assets from future losses, but in reality because I needed money for my legal expenses." "That's illegal." "Your access to my accounts was revoked after your arrest." "Really? Because it seems there are some documents the investigators didn't find. Some powers of attorney you signed months ago when you started having memory problems." "I never signed any power of attorney." "Of course you didn't. But your signature on those documents says otherwise." At that moment, I understood that Luis hadn't come to dinner to enjoy a social evening. He had come to steal everything I could before fleeing the country. "Luis, I'm calling the police right now." "Go ahead, but by the time they get here, I'll already be on a plane going somewhere they can't touch me, and you'll be explaining to everyone here why the chef at your elegant dinner is involved in family scandals." "What do you mean?" Luis smiled with that cruel expression I now recognized as his true personality. "I mean that in exactly 5 minutes I'm going to leave this kitchen. I'm going to take the microphone they're using for the charity dinner announcements, and I'm going to tell all these important business people a very interesting story about Frank and about you. Frank is dead. You can't hurt him, but I can hurt you. Did you know your dear husband not only knew I was taking money from the company, he was doing it too. I have documents proving Frank stole more than $100,000 in the last 5 years of his life." "That's a lie." "Of course it is. So how do you explain that you managed to pay off the house completely when Frank earned a modest salary? How do you explain the investments that magically appeared after his death?" I felt like the world was crumbling under my feet. Frank worked honestly his whole life. Frank was as much a thief as me, just smarter. And if you don't want all these elegant people to find that out tonight, you're going to do exactly what I'm telling you. What do you want? "I want you to transfer the money from selling your stocks to an account I'm going to give you. It's exactly $45,000. Consider it a loan for all the years I worked, for free for your husband's company. Worked for free because you were stealing." "That will never be. Proven if my version of the story is the only one left." At that moment, Luis showed me a recorder he had in his pocket. I have recordings of conversations with Frank where he admits to the theft. Conversations I never showed the investigators. You're lying. Want to bet? Because in 5 minutes, all these people are going to hear these recordings, and Frank's reputation will be destroyed forever, unless you cooperate. I looked at Luis and realized I had completely underestimated his evil. He wasn't just an opportunistic thief. He was a psychopathic manipulator willing to destroy my dead husband's memory to get what he wanted. But what Luis didn't know was that I had learned some things during this week, and one of them was that I wasn't going to let anyone intimidate me anymore. Luis, I told him in the calmest voice I could muster, you're right about one thing. In 5 minutes, you're going to take that microphone. Does that mean you're going to cooperate? It means you're going to tell everyone exactly who you are, but not in the way you think. Luis looked at me, confused. What are you talking about? I smiled at him for the first time since he entered the kitchen. I'm saying that Michael has been recording this conversation from outside the kitchen, and that the police are waiting in the parking lot to arrest you for violating bail and blackmail. Luis's face turned white as paper. Besides, I continued, enjoying every word, those fake recordings you claim to have of Frank have already been analyzed by forensic experts. Michael found them on your computer before the police confiscated it. Luis began backing toward the kitchen door, but it was too late. Michael entered with 2 police officers right at that moment. Luis Martinez, one of the officers, said, "You're under arrest for violating your bail, blackmail, and additional fraud." When the police handcuffed Luis for the second time in a week, the entire kitchen filled with curious guests who had heard the commotion. Diana, the club president, and at least 20 important people at the event witnessed the man who had been trying to manipulate and impress them for years being taken away in handcuffs. But the real justice was just beginning. The sweet victory, after they took Luis away handcuffed for the second time. The silence in the club dining room was deafening. 50 of the most important people in the business community had witnessed the arrest. And I stood in the middle of the kitchen, still wearing my apron, feeling like I had just woken up from a 3-year nightmare. Diana was the first to break the silence. She came up to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Rose, are you okay?" "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I replied, and I was surprised to realize it was completely true. Michael approached with a smile. "Ma'am, did you know Luis was planning to blackmail you tonight?" "I suspected it. That's why I asked you to install that microphone in my apron before coming." "Wait," said the club president who had come to listen. "You knew he was going to try something like this." "My son-in-law has been a manipulator for years. The difference is that before I didn't know how to defend myself." At that moment, one of the guests who had witnessed everything, Mr. Morrison, Luis's boss, approached the group. "Ma'am, I want to apologize on behalf of our company. If we had known what kind of person Luis was, we never would have hired him." "Mr. Morrison, you have nothing to apologize for. Luis was very good at deceiving people. It's true that he had been stealing for years. It's true, but it's also true he can't do it anymore." Morrison nodded gravely. "I want you to know that our company will do everything possible to help you recover the stolen money. We have insurance against this type of fraud, and will ensure you receive full compensation." Those words filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. Not just because I was going to get my money back, but because finally someone was treating me with the respect I deserved. Diana took the microphone from the podium and addressed all the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, after tonight's events, I think we can all agree that Mrs. Rose has shown extraordinary strength and dignity. She not only prepared a spectacular dinner for us, but also faced a terrible situation with a grace that we should all admire." The applause that followed brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in years, they were applauding me, not someone who was taking credit for my work. "Furthermore," Diana continued, "I want to announce that the business club will donate an additional $5,000 to Mrs. Rose in recognition of her exemplary service and to help her with any legal expenses she may have due to the crimes committed against her. $8,000 total for one night of work. More than Luis had stolen from me in an entire year." Kelly approached me while the guests returned to their tables to finish dinner. "Mrs. Rose, I have more good news. The documents Luis claimed to have found about Frank were forgeries." Our experts analyzed them and confirmed they were created digitally using editing software. So Frank never stole anything? Your husband was completely honest throughout his career. Luis created those fake documents as a backup plan in case he was discovered. He planned to use them to blackmail you or to cast doubt on the credibility of the evidence against him. I felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my chest. Frank's memory was clear. My 30-year marriage was still the pure love I had always believed it was. And what's going to happen to Luis now? With the additional charges from tonight, he'll probably spend between 5 and 8 years in prison. And when he gets out, he'll have to pay full restitution of everything he stole, with interest. That night, when I finally got home after the most successful dinner of my life, I sat on the couch where it all began 2 weeks earlier and reflected on everything that had changed. The woman who had gone on the cruise was a submissive grandmother who had spent 3 years being invisible in her own life. The woman who had returned was someone completely different, strong, independent, respected, and most importantly, free. 6 months later, a new life. 6 months later, my life had changed completely. With the money I recovered from Luis, plus the insurance compensation, and the fees I started earning as a private chef for special events, I had more financial security than ever. I sold the house where I had lived for 30 years. I didn't want to be in a place that had been violated by Luis anymore, and it was also too big for a single woman. I bought a beautiful apartment in a modern building with an ocean view, where I could see the sunrise every morning from my balcony. But the most important thing I did was start something I never imagined, a support center for elderly women who are victims of financial or emotional abuse by their own families. I named it Frank's House in honor of my husband. Every week, women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s come to the center telling stories similar to mine. Adult children who treat them like housekeepers, sons-in-law who manage their finances without authorization, families who make them feel like burdens instead of respected matriarchs. My story became known throughout the community. Local newspapers wrote articles about the grandmother who stood up for herself, and I started receiving invitations to speak at events about elderly rights. But the most meaningful moment for me was when I received a letter from Frances, the lady I met on the cruise. She wrote to me from Mexico, where she lived, to tell me that after our conversations she had found the courage to confront her own son, who was pressuring her to sell her house and move to a nursing home. "Dear Rose," the letter said, "your example taught me that it's never too late to defend our dignity. My son now treats me with respect, and I'm living my final years as I want to live them, not as others want me to live them." Brenda and I slowly began rebuilding our relationship. She got a job as a teacher, divorced Luis, and gradually began treating me like a mother, not an employee. But the relationship never went back to being the same, and that was good. It was better. It was more honest. Luis was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Sometimes Brenda asks me if I feel sorry for him, and I always tell her the same thing. I feel sorry for the time I lost being his victim, but I don't feel sorry for the consequences of his actions. Now, 1 year after all this, when people ask me what was the moment that changed my life, I always say the same thing. It wasn't when I stood up to Luis. It wasn't when he was arrested. It wasn't when I got my money back. The moment that changed my life was when I slowly moved my cup, looked my daughter in the eyes and said, "Of course, but I won't be here." Because that was the moment I decided that my life belonged to me, not to others' expectations. And that decision saved me. And you who are listening to me, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your own family is treating you disrespectfully, remember my story. It's never too late to defend your dignity. You're never too old to start a new life. And you're never forced to be invisible in your own existence. Have you suffered such family injustice? Have you had to defend yourself from people who should love you? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories because we all deserve to be heard and respected.